Thank you, Presiding Officer, and like others, let me thank Gordon MacDonald for the opportunity to recognise the Cheyne Gang singing group. Let me also, like others, say that I am paid to remain silent when singing is part of it, but I suggest I can do a bit of whistling and humming as background to the singing, because that's equally good for the lungs. So maybe a portable session with me as background humming might be an answer. Elaine Smith referred to how this is a very inexpensive way of helping people with pulmonary rehabilitation. So therefore I would expect that the Health Service will be signing up for this with great enthusiasm. But there are practical issues around this. I too was diagnosed as a sufferer from what was then described as bronchospasm in the 1940s, and was treated with a horrible little M&B tablet, which was delivered to me in a spoon wrapped in tomato jam. To this day, I'm a little bit averse to having tomato jam, although it's not clear whether that was bronchitis or asthma or what the condition that was being treated for was, but it was one that continued into my adult life, but no longer does. In my case, because my father, who was a GP, taught me hypnotism, which we might now call mindfulness, which I'm able to use my psychological skills to stop it happening. My medical practice thinks I should have an inhaler with me at all times. Haven't had one for 30 years, too bad. But the bottom line is that singing helps us in particular to avoid the rapid breath stacking pattern of breathing, dynamic hyperventilation of lungs, which reduces the inspiration of air. Because, of course, when you've got an attack, you think you can't breathe in, whereas the reality is you can't breathe out. And, of course, our lungs can hold 3 litres of air, but our breathing is about 500 mil. I'm down at the 380 mil because of my life-term condition, although I've stopped using the lift in Parliament here up to the 5th floor, and my lung capacity has gone up by 15% because I've got a device for measuring it. So I encourage, there are many ways of cheaply doing things. But the bottom line is asthma and lung conditions generally stop people being active, they cut them off from social occasions, they have psychological negatives, anxiety, depression and hospitalisation. So communities like the Cheyne Gang have much wider effects beyond the purely medical. They have social benefits which we should encourage as well. Now, there are 8 million people in the UK diagnosed with asthma. Now, I find that slightly puzzling because in my year at school, and I went to probably the biggest school in Scotland, with over 400 people in my year at secondary school, there were only 3 of us had asthma, and that was Roger, Teddy and me. Whereas now it's 1 in 17. So there's something about the modern world that means this is a more pressing concern than it might have been. If the presiding officer allows,
Lane
yes.
Smith.
Thank the member for taking the intervention. And on that issue, just last week, it was discovered that although more boys might have asthma, actually more women than men are dying of asthma, which is a point that I think needs looked at, and I have put some questions down about it.
Stewart Stevenson.
A very interesting point that I wasn't aware of, so thank you to Elaine Smith for bringing it up. It's worth saying in the previous session of Parliament, one of our colleagues suffered from COPD. I won't name him because it wasn't necessarily generally known, but you could see the suffering that individual was experiencing from time to time. Fortunately, they're continuing to experience good life after Parliament. Now, of course, tobacco has been a contributor to improving things as smoking rates have come down because it's always been a trigger, although it was always one of the ironies of tobacco that it froze the cilia in your bronchial tubes and actually initially made you feel better, not worse, which is a very curious and unhelpful thing. But pulmonary rehabilitation as an education programme part of physical exercise, other things, is a good way to go about things. It's worth saying, of course, that we've moved on terrifically. In the 1940s, when I was first diagnosed, the treatment was that M&B tablet, and you went out in the street when there was a tar wagon around because it was thought the tar fumes were helpful. It's rather doubtful whether that was actually the case. But there were many myths, and I think some of these endure to the present day. The Scottish Government's plan to improve pulmonary rehabilitation through its respiratory care arm is to be welcomed, but the chain gang and community groups across Scotland who are in the front line and will recognise the value to their communities of leading the way in which they're doing is something to be utterly commended, and I'm astonished and delighted to hear about their work as somebody who I think I now should describe as a former asthmatic.